Recording has started.
Okay, perfect. Well, welcome to the December 18th, 2024 Long Range Planning Committee, LRPC. Oh, Tony, you can sit here. Meeting on the 1320 North Courthouse Road Special Glove Study. We'll be holding a, is there an echo though, right?
Yes.
Okay. Should I keep going even though there's an echo? Okay. We will be holding a hybrid public meeting which enables remote electronic participation as well as legally authorized by the Code of Virginia per the Planning Commission's electronic meeting policy adopted on July 7th, 2022. Do we have any PC members online? Okay. There are some commissioners participating virtually as well as in the room. At this time, I'd like to orient everyone to our hybrid environment and cover a few specific House meeting will run. Members of the public may attend the meeting here. They may attend the meeting here in person or electronically by using the Microsoft Teams link provided on the LRPC web pages, the county's events calendar, and the email notification sent to LRPC's email subscribers. Additionally, there's a dial-in option for those who wish to use it. For our planning commissioners joining virtually, if anyone loses internet connectivity during tonight's meeting, please reconnect with us by phone. Please keep your phone and devices muted until you're called upon. Turn off sound to any other device around you to minimize interference. For our virtual attendees using Microsoft Teams, please turn off your video feed and we will address it when it's appropriate for you to turn it on. The Microsoft Teams meeting chat is active for two purposes. First, to assist participants who need technical support, and second, for participants to pose brief clarifying questions to a larger audience. While the clarifying questions will be monitored, they will not be formally acknowledged. Staff may address these comments as appropriate. The Teams chat should not be used for discussion or inappropriate statements. Those who are planning to provide public comment may only do so at the end of the meeting, as the chat may not be used for that purpose. All public comments must be shared verbally for the record during the assigned public testimony period. If commissioners participating virtually wish to be recognized to speak on an item during the course of the meeting, please turn your video feed on and raise the virtual hand. In Teams, I, as well as staff, will monitor the video feeds. We also would like to remind everyone in the room to please speak up slowly and clearly and point your mouth to the microphone to allow virtual participants to hear you. Hello. Unlike the Planning Commission's regular meetings, the LRPC agenda items are not public hearings. Therefore, public comment is at the LRPC chair's discretion. I will call for speakers at the end of the meeting after the committee discussion has concluded. Members of the public attending virtually will speak first, followed by in-person attendees. The speaking time allotted will depend on the number of speakers we have this evening. In-person attendees, please add your name to the speaker list on the table. Virtual attendees, please indicate in the chat if you'd like to provide comment, and your name will be added to our list of speakers. We'll acknowledge Teams request in the Teams chat. When virtual attendees are called upon to speak, you must unmute yourself by clicking on the microphone icon that is located on your meeting command bar. The moderator does not have the ability to unmute you. You will be muted when your time has concluded. As an alternative, public comment may also be provided on the public comment form posted on the LRPC webpage. And of course, comments can always be submitted by email to staff. Lastly, this is a public forum. Today's meeting will be recorded and posted to the county website. All information associated with today's meeting, whether written or spoken, is subject to the Freedom of Information Act requirements. So tonight's agenda is jam-packed, like jam-packed. So I just want to make sure that everybody understands that. And perhaps we might do ourselves a favor by not necessarily taking the time to say, I agree with what Tony said, and then just regurgitate what Tony said, right? So let's just kind of be thoughtful so we can get to all the discussion that would be helpful to staff and the applicant tonight. All right, thank you very much. This is up to you. Introductions. Oh, Tony, go ahead.
My name is Tony Striner. I'm with the Planning Commission.
Peter Robertson, Planning Commission.
Jill Barker, Park and Rec Commission.
Bob Braddock, Lion Village Citizen.
Sohail Hussein, Transportation Commission.
Pat Munger, Arlington Land Use Group, here tonight on behalf of MetLife.
Stuart Stein,
Wagner from Wire Heights Civic Association.
Emily Peterson, Planning Commission.
I'm Scott Barton, president of the Clarendon Courthouse Civic Association.
And special thanks to you, Scott, for allowing me to keep my comfort zone here.
No problem.
Matt Matuzak with the Planning Division.
Margaret Rhodes, Planning.
Chris Kreider, Planning Division.
Devanshi Patel, LRPC Chair.
Chad Berwick, I'm with Clarendon Courthouse Civic Association.
Wonderful, thank you. Oh, who do we have online? Jim, you're here with us?
Yeah, I'm here. Jim Lancelmi, Planning Commission.
Thank you. Are there any other planning commissioners online?
Hi, Karen Surface with the Housing Commission.
Thank you, Karen.
County staff as well.
Okay, and then I see we have Brett and other members of county staff. Brett, did you want to say hi?
Hi,
Okay.
Angie with Department of Transportation.
Hi, Angie. Okay, well, Brett, we'll see you soon.
Walter Gonzalez, the Department of Parks and Rec.
Hi, Walter.
Hi, everyone. Good evening. Brett Wallace. I'm sorry I'm having connection issues, so I'm going to have to log out and log back in again.
Okay, thank you. Okay.
Is it looking in yours? I think it's maximized. Okay. So we're getting the smallest preview of the screen, but everybody looking virtually, I think, has their full screen. See if I can make any adjustments here.
So I'll get started. I'm Margaret Rhodes with the Planning Division. And thank you all for coming tonight. And we can go to the next slide. So just to orient you to all the materials that we're going to be covering from a staff perspective, we're going to be looking at the special general land use plan or special GLUP study policy, the site location, the requested amendment, background information, policy guidance. We're going to turn it over to the applicant for a brief presentation, and then we're going to go through some 3D computer modeling, a staff analysis, and then we'll conclude with the LRPC discussion. I know that some of you have been involved in special GLUP studies before and some of you haven't. So just for any of those who need a refresher or are new to this, the county board adopted the policy for consideration of general land use plan amendments unanticipated by previous planning efforts in 2008. This policy calls for a community review process in those instances where there is either no adopted plan or, as in this instance, where the GLUP amendment request is inconsistent with the guidance of the relevant adopted plan. Special GLUP studies are important. They evaluate the appropriateness of the requested GLUP change and other GLUP categories that may be appropriate. And following process revisions, we instituted a two-tier approach in 2019. For the next slide, we'll go over briefly the very basic premises of the Tier 1 review. So the Tier 1 review is really a staff evaluation and recommendation using our administrative process guide criteria to determine whether or not we should conduct a full Tier 2 review. It involves LRPC discussion and concludes with a memo from the LRPC chair to staff summarizing the feedback. And then the CPHD director issues a letter regarding whether or not we should proceed with that Tier 2 review. So the Tier 2 full review analysis includes history of the GLUP and zoning designations, analysis of relevant plans and policies, the proposed request, 3D modeling, transportation, and includes online feedback opportunities for the community and other stakeholders. And the recommendations reflect the GLUP designations and or other recommendations to guide appropriate development, such as maximum building height. And it concludes with either a request to advertise or not to advertise and a study document or staff recommendation. In the Tier 1 review, it's basically asking that question to study or not to study in greater depth. And it's a real focus on those high-level land use questions. Tier 2 looks in a little bit more depth at potential GLUP amendments, what GLUP category or categories might be appropriate, and then what other guidance should be provided. It's focusing on the high-level land use questions, such as land use, density, building height, etc. And then to distinguish the special GLIP study, which is conducted under the auspices of LRPC, from the site plan review, which is conducted through the site plan review process, that's really focusing on a specific redevelopment application and looking at the height, density, architecture, access, tapering, all those specific things. So that's really looking at a project. But tonight we're really focusing on the high level land use. And so because there's no GLUP amendment that's actually acted upon as part of the special GLUP study, it concludes with a recommendation that a GLUP amendment may be in the realm of consideration should there be an appropriate future site plan. And so it's only following the SPRC review, and if there is an appropriate site plan, that then maybe the GLUP might be amended. So in terms of equity, we've developed this process with input from a lot of different stakeholders, and we really focus on equity throughout the process. That's why we have a number of stakeholders here at the table, and that's why we want to get your input and the community and stakeholder input. So as we went around the room, you can see we have a number of different stakeholder groups here: housing, park and rec, transportation. We've got Clarendon Courthouse Civic Association, Lyons Village Citizens Association. We have RAFOM. We invited Colonial Village to send a representative. We have the applicant, and we also invited the owner of the adjacent parcel at 1310 North Courthouse. Now to focus in a little bit more on this particular study, I'm sure you're familiar with this site. It's situated on the south side of 14th Street North, between Northeast Street and North Courthouse Road. The subject block includes both the 1320 and the 1310 buildings, as well as Verizon Plaza, which has a public access easement. Verizon Plaza was included in the 2015 Courthouse Sector Plan Addendum Courthouse Square, but the rest of the block was not. The subject sites include existing office uses and 2 large below-grade parking garages. You can see adjacent, this area is adjacent to a mix of different uses. This really is the county's governmental seat. So we have government facilities, the theater and shops, large-scale residential development, large public surface parking lot, and some hotels in the vicinity. It's of course located on the Orange Line and is serviced by numerous bus lines. Taking a look here, you can see 1320 North Courthouse on the right side of the photo on the left. And then on the photo on the right, you can see 1310 North Courthouse in the foreground and 1320 North Courthouse behind that. The applicant has requested to adjust the boundary of the Courthouse Square Special District to incorporate the subject property 1320, thereby making the property eligible for the provisions in the zoning ordinance through a special exception site plan, so through a site plan. They're also requesting increased density up to levels comparable with those that were achieved on the landmark block, which is approximately in the 10.0 FAR floor area ratio. And they've requested additional building height up to levels necessary to accommodate 10.0 FAR at, again, that level similar to what was ultimately achieved on the landmark block. And they are requesting to be able to apply the CO zoning district, but with the provisions for the Courthouse Square Special District. And here's some important information. So the provisions of the zoning ordinance for 1559, which allows for bonus density and height, would allow an application right now with their property to pursue additional density above 3.8 and 4.8 FAR limits. So those are the limits associated with the CO zoning that they currently have. So a boundary adjustment is not necessary to seek additional density. However, with any adopted plan guidance that envisions greater heights than the zoning maximums, which is up to 180 for residential development, there would not be an opportunity to pursue building heights above 180. And for reference, the building is right now at 153 feet. As the Courthouse Square addendum is a form-based plan, staff's evaluation will benchmark against maximum heights established elsewhere in the special district and will not aim to achieve a specific FAR. So while the applicant's request focused on a specific FAR, our plan, the Courthouse Square plan, is really a form-based. So we're going to be talking about in staff's presentation about the general land use plan, about building height and form, as opposed to what would generate a certain FAR. And then regarding potential community benefits with a future site plan, a prospective development could achieve density and help achieve a future square without being in special district. Also, its inclusion in the special district does not necessarily guarantee that such a future site plan would enable the creation of the square, i.e. the park and the underground park. A little bit more specific background information here. This is the existing general land use plan designation. It's high office apartment hotel. It allows up to 3.8 FAR for office or hotel development and up to 4.8 FAR for residential development. Here we can see an excerpt from our zoning map, and you can see that the subject site is CO. And what does CO allow? On this next page, we have CO. So this is what they currently have. It allows for office, apartment, hotel, or elder care. We just talked about the densities of 3.8 or 4.8 FAR, and the maximum heights are 153 for office, which is where they are right now. And then you can go up to 180 feet for apartment, hotel, or elder care. And then what the applicant is looking for by requesting an amendment to the special district boundary, they're looking to access some of the special provisions for Courthouse Square. So that is guided by, and it's codified in the zoning ordinance. We have a map in the zoning ordinance, which we'll see also. It has the each building that's in the district and has a set maximum height. And the county board is not allowed to modify those heights. It's under no circumstances shall the height exceed these heights here on this codified map. And then in terms of the height and form parameters, those again are also guided by the Courthouse Square addendum. In terms of topography, I'm sure you're familiar with this area. There is quite a bit of topography on the site. So the lowest point is the 192 at the corner of Beach and 13th Street. And the highest point is at Courthouse and 14th Street at 230. From a transportation context, this area is very well served by Metro, very close, 0.2 miles, various ART bus lines and various Metro bus lines. In addition, there are Capital Bike Share and shared mobility device locations quite close. So looking at the adopted policy guidance that we have here, because this is not within the Courthouse Sector Plan addendum boundary, we are looking to some of our adopted guidance. So from a general land use plan perspective, some relevant guidance in the development and growth goals, increase the supply of housing by encouraging a construction and variety of housing types near Metro, concentrate high density residential, commercial, and office development in our Metro station areas, and promote mixed use development in these areas. The Affordable Housing Master Plan also has some relevant guidance here. Arlington County shall have an adequate supply of housing available to meet community needs. Encourage the construction and preservation of affordable rental housing through land use zoning policy, financial and technical assistance. And goal 3, Arlington County shall ensure that its housing contributes to a sustainable community. And that speaks to proximity of housing to transit and transit-oriented development. The Public Spaces Master Plan has some guidance here. The Courthouse Square is envisioned as the premier community gathering place for conversation, relaxation, and to celebrate important civic events. And then looking at the public spaces master plan level of service standards, this area has a need for dog parks, community gardens, and volleyball courts. So the adopted policy guidance that does encompass this area goes back to 1993 in the original Courthouse Sector Plan addendum. This document, however, did not have a lot of specific guidance for this area. It called for higher density commercial / residential / mixed use, but it didn't specify a specific club category. And then in 2015, some of you were involved in that process. We created a new addendum that focused on the Courthouse Square area. Only the Verizon site on this block was included within the study district boundary. But just looking at this, because it is adjacent and the applicant is requesting amendment of the boundary, there are some key guiding principles that we should keep in mind tonight. So Courthouse Square is designed for everyone, an attractive, accessible, inclusive public space. Make sure that we're connecting the pedestrian circulation, encourage optimal use of the streets, encourage sustainability best practices, accommodate public and county parking needs. Preserve significant views both into and out of Courthouse Square, and this is something Chris is going to talk about in a moment. Use that existing topography to celebrate the plateau, ease pedestrian movements, create a cohesive experience. Foster a multi-hour, 18-hour-a-day use throughout the week, and create opportunities and infrastructure for public entertainment, discourse, community gathering, etc., and celebrate Courthouse Square's rich history. And now I'm going to turn it over to Chris, who is going to speak in a little bit more detail about some of the urban design considerations.
Excuse me. Thank you, Margaret. The culmination of the sector plan addendum was a 2-year process. It was a very vigorous working group process led by former Commissioner Nancy Alcomidi. And there was a lot of discussion throughout the process about the importance of the location, but also the topography. So through that process, as she mentioned earlier, it was not really about FAR as much as about how it fit within the context of the neighborhood. So the landmark block, which is where the Commodore today was identified as the highest building in the Courthouse Square at 210 feet. There was, and there's a lot of debate about this, a smaller civic building placed on the south lawn of the Courthouse Square, a maximum height of 50. The purpose of this was not determined, but it was important that it sort of define the square as a civic place, a traditional town hall in the Courthouse Square type of symbolism. Importantly also that the county, one of the reasons why we did the sector plan addendum is the county controls the land under the AMC Theater, as well as Court Square West, which is a county facility. At that time, we were looking at potentially vacating our lease in this building, and we wanted to understand what the potential was for additional growth. Obviously, we did not do that, and we signed up for another lease here. And then finally, we looked at Verizon Plaza because there was already a public access on there, but it felt detached from the overall shape and form of the square. So we thought as an incentive to have development there, it would improve the opportunities on the square and define it to the south. Nothing against the present buildings, but we were hoping that a more civic natured building would sit on that location. Importantly, a lot of debate about height at this site, and it was maxed out at 120 feet based on a lot of shadow analysis. And it sort of faces south, so we wanted the square, which is largely an open lawn with the grove to the north, to be blessed with a lot of good sunlight. The other element too was this promenade, which we have a segment of today, which will extend down the original Mule Street, and then originally was going to terminate at 14th. And in the diagram to your right, you see that through the importance of sort of maintaining the scale, particularly at Wilson and Clarendon, sort of the post-war 2 to 3 story scale of Boyers Row and other areas like that. Those areas facing pedestrian streets had a minimum 10-foot step back at 30 feet in height. And as you see in that diagram, that sort of surrounded the square. And that was important to the overall pedestrian focus. This next slide, just want to focus very briefly on 4th Street. Can you advance the slide? Thank you. The diagram on your right is of 14th Street as it was envisioned in the sector plan addendum. The idea was to make it a shared street, much like 15th is today, and really engage so that the entire square can be closed off for major civic events, and that it also feel like a seamless pedestrian experience across the square. Next slide. One of the important things in our due diligence that we came across during the sector plan addendum is that the county board had adopted a resolution in 1982. And this is in response to coordination with the National Capital Planning Commission. As you'll see in a moment, Courthouse Square is dead in the sights of the National Mall. And as we started to observe this and engage our regional partners, we elected to work with them and to do a study. But prior to that, at that time, what's important is that there was an agreement that the site plan generally would allow office structures at 150 feet height. Well, the two sites that are in question, one was approved in 1983, and the other one was built, that would be the 1310 site, where the Bell Atlantic then became Verizon Plaza, now it's owned by MRP, is located. So that's the older building in 1983, and it is at 153 feet. So there's a direct line of decisioning that the board established 153, created the resolution, and then established the height of the buildings for this two in particular. And so the second building, which is the subject site, was built in 1990, 92, and it's also at 115. So back in 2015, we worked with NCPC and they developed a study. And so on the basis was, we wanted to test heights up to 300. So the current zoning at that time was 153. As Margaret said, we would allow 180, but there was conversation about, okay, what is the maximum? As we said, it's a form-based discussion. So this site section is very hard to see, but we looked from the Capitol through the Washington Monument, Lincoln Memorial, and on to Courthouse. So this is a cross-section profile. Next slide. And we started to sort of analyze, this was their analysis that NCPC did with their photography, and established a relative skyline, if you will, at 210 feet. And that was sort of, if you look at Colonial Place, which is across the street from here, that's pretty much, and that's not even 210, that was about 180. So we were seeing what 210 would look like. Next slide. Now, what we're going to show today is their analysis, but we've updated it to include the subject property, 1310. So this is an analysis of the different heights that were considered as part of the 2015 study. We've made updates to reflect what those same heights previously considered would look like at 1320 North Courthouse Road. So you can see that it shows up, and if you look at the legend to the left, upper left, you'll see building C. It's the 1310 property, or 1320, excuse me. And you can see in the lower image that it pops up a little bit in the memorial. Next slide. So when we studied it at 300 feet, both, originally it was studied at the landmark block, and then we've popped in sort of what 1320 would look like. This is an approximation, and we have reached out to NCPC about this. We have not, we're waiting sort of direction from the LRPC, whether to engage them further. But we typically, anytime there's a site plan within this cone, we engage with them. So Marbella was one that we did it recently. There's some buildings in Roslyn we've done. So this is sort of the manner of discussions with our partners. So this is at 300. Next slide. And so, I think it was important for staff to sort of help you understand where we got to 210 and the history of that, where we took it, where we followed through. And with that, I think we've got one more slide, just some additional guidance from the Clarendon Courthouse Civic Association. their conservation plan, which is now 17 years old. But the top concerns were parking, traffic, the high cost of living, that the population was stripping the capacity, the lack of adequate parks and open spaces, which was one of the reasons why the courthouse square is so important, noise. And then they really wanted to keep this series of short blocks. So that's the promenade, and maybe further discussion about future on this block, keeping the buildings at human scale, having parks and plazas, and maintaining older buildings. So with that, I think we're going to have the applicant now do their presentation. Then we'll come back for the 3D modeling that staff has done. Thank you.
Great. We're waiting for Ashley to go ahead and start our presentation. Okay, so go ahead and jump to slide 6. I think staff did a good job. We don't need to repeat the background. So good evening again, everybody. My name is Tad Mulger, the Arlington Land Use Group. I'm here tonight and joined by Brian Harner, Lab for Architecture. He and his shop actually worked on this addendum plan when it was going through review at the county. So we have active participants. I was also present during this planning process as an attorney, having done this for multiple decades in Arlington County now. And of course, we have a representative from my client, which is MetLife, here tonight, Matt Pacinelli, to speak to business matters if there are any questions. But we're actually, we're very excited to be here tonight. We see tonight as a very positive opportunity for Arlington. To give you a little background, Courthouse, like many places in Arlington, is suffering through a change in the market. We've read a lot of stats lately, 22% vacancy, things like that. You read about that from PR blasts, and that those numbers are not true. The courthouse vacancy rate is somewhere around 50%. This site is at somewhere, and correct me if I'm wrong, Matt, somewhere around 30% occupied. These are big red lines for Arlington market. This is a significant block. And we are here tonight because we're at a fork in the road. And I was lucky enough to be able to reach into, with the help of Matt, to reach into MetLife's portfolio and pull this opportunity out for Arlington. Right now, there's sort of two plans on the table. The first, I think, is a horrible plan. It would be a real loss for Arlington, which is to go ahead and reinvest in the existing asset to set it in place for about 50 years, 50-year. So we have it with reinvestment, but nothing that's going to blow anybody's socks off. So we're looking at, a 50-year hold on the Bell Atlantic building. The reason I saw this as a great opportunity for Arlington is having, observed the 2015 process and followed it very keenly, as somebody who's worked in courthouses entire legal career. I feel like I practically live here. I probably spend more hours in courthouse than I do at home. And my time here with staff and with members of the community, this is the heart of Arlington's civic life. And, this is an opportunity to actually realize the civic components of this great vision that were not achieved when the landmark building was developed. The landmark building was developed. It contributed about $9.5 million of community benefits to the courthouse, the public courthouse effort. Those resources were broken up and dispersed so that they really did not have an effect on achieving this vision, and we lost that opportunity. So this building was constructed, and the vast majority of these public improvements and these goals and this vision was not invested in. And as you go around this map, the blue line is the existing boundary line of the courthouse sector plan addendum, the core, right? You have the Justice Center to the west. You now have the landmark building, which is called the Commodore, to the north, framing the north side of the park. And then on the west side, you have the county administrative sites that could be developed. But as you go around this core, there is no remaining developable parcel or partner for the county to use to encourage the contribution of resources to generate a community goal and benefit of this scale, except for the South Block. I know a lot of us, when we were going through the 2015 plan, were very discouraged that the South Block was not part of this plan. Like it was the South bookend. We had a North bookend with the landmark building. This park was supposed to be framed, with Arlington Civic presence on all sides, and the South component of this was never integrated into it. It was largely because the ownership at that time didn't choose to press participation or didn't volunteer to participate. And I don't think we need to go into the reasons why, but they didn't. And so we lost that opportunity, I believe, in 2015. It was a loss. But they're here today, and they are at a turning point. We've done the financial analyses of what this block could contribute to something like that central civic green and the shared streets, and we'll go over all that in a minute. But we're talking about the South Block. If we are rezoned to the CO Special Courthouse District, it would give us the opportunity to contribute somewhere around 3 to 4 times the benefits that the landmark building could produce. It's a substantial opportunity. It's one that's not going to repeat itself. It's a generational opportunity, and taking off my representation of my client hat and putting on my Arlington hat, this is something I think would be a travesty for us to let slip by. We're not here tonight to achieve any major site plan or project specific goal. Tonight, we're simply requesting, the basis for this request is to simply request the modification of the boundary line to include the South Block in the Courthouse Special District zoning area. The reason for that is a significant affirmative action to the ownership. MetLife, again, is the equity in this block. I represent the investment, the money, not a developer, but the investors, to allow them to then release the funding necessary to start a really wholesome, robust project study and eventually come in with a project proposal that would outline everything that they could do. This is a gateway moment for the Planning Commission, the County Board, to open the door and welcome a partner who would like to have the opportunity to invest substantial sums in Courthouse. South Courthouse has never performed as an office market. It has always underperformed. Matt is here. He can speak to that if you have questions. We call the South Courthouse in our business, we call it the freezer. Because it has never performed. It's C- properties, C properties. It's not going to get better. And there hasn't been reinvestment in South Courthouse because, let's be honest, without creating the vision for Courthouse, there's nothing to invest in here. It's a dying part of a forgotten sub-market in Arlington. It's on the far side of a giant parking lot. You start going down the hill, and we view this investment as a major economic development opportunity for South Courthouse.
So Ted, I just want to give you a time warning. You have about 2 minutes left, and I know we have a slide check, so I'm working on getting through your whole presentation.
Right. So, I just wanted to get the context of this request and what the request actually is, which is simply a request to relocate that boundary line and to come back at a later date with the full comprehensive study and proposal. Next slide, Ashley. So you saw this slide before. This is the goal, right? This is what we want to produce. This is the giant civic green. This is, would be the largest public venue in the RB corridor. We think this would probably be the best public venue in the Arlington corridor. Ideally, we'd like to expand this space into the South Block and then get larger. We fully embrace this whole concept of shared streets where we can expand that giant space into the streets and retail spaces that would frame this park. This is a view looking from the plan, looking southwest from the northeast corner. The block we're talking about is on the left there. Next slide, Ashley. Here's a concept of the shared streets that would frame this. Again, this would create the destination in Courthouse. This would create the bookend of the sub-quarter of Clarendon Courthouse. We started out this project very early with the community. We went straight to the community. We've met with the county board on this multiple times. We've made the rounds. We have a lot of support for this proposal. Next slide, Ashley. Existing conditions. I mean, we can all just acknowledge this giant dysfunctional mess we have right in the center of Arlington's headquarters, which is kind of embarrassing. It prohibits Courthouse from functioning as it should, and certainly nowhere near envisions the goals of that plan, which is to underground out this massive civic green. Next slide, Ashley. We have tested these concepts out. We're not allowed to show them tonight, which is fine. But this is a test fit that the Brian shop did. It shows how we could do a potential development and not affect any component of the existing plan. The reason we follow this as an amendment, actually, and not as a study, is we believe Courthouse has been studied. The plan itself has been studied. And so this is a concept that shows working within existing heights contemplated by the plan, existing density contemplated by the plan, how you can simply drop this block into the existing framework. We can do a lot with height, and we can do a lot as we open things up and move things around, actually create additional open space. But this is just a prove out that we can do something like this without affecting any of the plan elements. Next slide, Ashley. These were some of the concept Brian's shop had, but since he gave part of this presentation. Next slide. And here's an overlay of something like that and what it would look like over the new civic green to give you some context into the height and massing as sketched into the plans already existing, into the plans already existing vision. So there's, next slide, Ashley. So there is, that is our ask. We would like for you all to turn the key, let this proceed to the county board to go ahead and let an RTA run to amend the boundary line of the courthouse addendum so that we can come in at a later date. We can go ahead and release the funds to start the study. We're going to spend millions and millions of dollars studying this if we're allowed to, and to come in with a plan that outlines how we would deliver the civic green, shared streets, this new block of development, which again would take an obsolete, distressed, massive asset off the books in Arlington County and replace it with, let's be honest, our new daytime crowd, which is residential units, and at a very substantial rate on transit, literally right on transit. And again, we think this is probably going to be one of the best used, most accessible new public venues for Arlington County, certainly the largest in the RV corridor. Here for questions.
Thank you. Okay, so I really would like to get to LRPC conversation like 7 minutes in you. Okay, thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much.
So we're going to have Brett Wallace, who's online, take us through the 3D modeling. Brett worked on the courthouse sector plan addendum and back again to help us see what additional height might mean on this block. So take it away, Brett.
Okay, thank you. Good evening again, everybody. Next slide, please. Just one thing to note, which is typical of GLUP studies, that staff develops a series of 3D modeling and urban design assumptions to help drive the form and massing and circulation in public space for the modeling. That's conceptual, but we need to start from somewhere. So we've put together a series of assumptions here that I'll run through quickly. So again, as mentioned earlier, this is based on a form-based approach per the sector plan addendum. And the modeling that we're going to be showing this evening are not showing any heights above 210 feet. Again, consistent with the sector plan addendum. The models that you'll be seeing incorporate redevelopment of 3 sites. So it's the Verizon site, which was part of the sector plan, and then the 1310 and 1320 North Courthouse Road sites. And again, looking at the entire block. And the site and density is in the existing parcel boundaries for the 3 sites, which I'll show you in a moment. Again, looking at the plan. And again, as mentioned earlier, the modeling for the Verizon site is shown on the existing 4 parcels, which is the current location of a public access easement. And again, that's consistent with the sector plan. So I'm going to run through 5 different 3D models that are outlined here. First, we'll be showing the existing conditions. We'll be second showing what was envisioned in the 2015 sector plan. And then we'll be showing, as noted earlier by Margaret, the limits of the existing GLUP designation, which is high office apartment hotel, and then the limits of the existing zoning under the CO regulations. And then we'll be finally looking at building heights of the sector plan if they were applied to the subject block. Next slide. So before we start looking at the models, we wanted to share this concept diagram that you see on the right here. Again, thinking about the circulation and some of the potential development sites on this block adjacent to the Verizon Plaza. So what you're seeing here is 3 conceptual building footprints. That's not to say that this couldn't be developed as 4 or 2, but for purposes of this conversation, we wanted to look at the site circulation and how we might break up the block and develop this into 3 different site plan projects potentially. Noted earlier, I think in the applicant's presentation, we think it would make good sense to extend the north-south promenade through this block as a circulation and potentially break up the block on the east-west as shown in the green arrows there behind the Verizon Plaza, which is envisioned as a civic building. So it would make sense to have some circulation east-west to help break up this block here. So when you see the models, this is the concept plan that was pretty much driving some of the modeling that you see. And in terms of measuring building height, we just wanted to also note that we're using the average site elevation, which is in the zoning ordinance. Because of the topography change here of roughly 30 to 40 feet, we wanted to make sure that we were modeling more realistic heights using the average site elevation. Again, I mentioned the promenade extension as a potential connection through the block. And in terms of building tower separation, we're assuming approximately 60 feet or 45-foot minimum, which is consistent with some of our other sector plans, like in Roslyn, for example. And as Chris mentioned earlier, the step backs that we're showing are approximately 10 feet deep at the 3rd floor, and this is consistent with the sector plan. And in terms of the streetscape and we're looking at widths that are consistent with the addendum. And if not in the addendum, then we'll be looking at the RB corridor streetscape standards. And then for the ground floor, we're assuming a 15 to 20-foot ground floor height for retail or retail equivalent uses. Next slide. So this is a side area. I know we showed this earlier, but just again, number 1 is the Verizon site. Number 2 is 1320 North Courthouse Road. 3 is 1310 North Courthouse Road. And so these are the different site areas that we were using to help calculate density from the modeling that you'll see in a second. Next slide. Okay, so the first model view that you see here is a view looking northeast. And so this is all the existing conditions. You see the Commodore, the landmark block at 210 feet on the right, and then the 2 existing buildings on the subject block at 153 feet in height. Next slide. Okay, so now this model is showing what was envisioned in the sector plan in 2015. Again, with the Verizon site being redeveloped at 120 feet, and then the 2 buildings on the subject block remaining at 153 feet. You can see 180 feet planned for Court Square West and 190 feet planned for the Strayer block. Next slide. So this scenario shows the limits of the existing general land use plan at the high office apartment hotel, which is 4.8 FAR for residential. So again, using the average site elevation, these models show these three buildings roughly, between 100 and 138 feet in height. Again, factoring in the topography on the site. So commensurate with the Verizon site at 120 feet. Slide. So this is a elevation looking west on Courthouse Road. So the slope that you see is the slope down Courthouse Road to Arlington Boulevard. So you can see the Commodore, the landmark block on the far right at 210, and then stepping down to 180 for the Court Square West building, and then the heights at 1310, stepping down towards the hotel to the south there. Next slide. This scenario here showing the limits of the existing zoning, which is CO and the 180-foot height limit. So you can get an idea here of what that would look like from this perspective. Next slide. And again, looking at it again in another west elevation from Courthouse Road on what that tapering would look like stepping down to the south towards Arlington Boulevard from the landmark block. Next slide. And then this final scenario shows the sector plan if it were applied to the block at the 210-foot height limit, which is what was the maximum height limits for the landmark block. So if we were to take those guidelines and apply them to this subject block, what that might look like. Next slide. And again, another elevation showing profile. Okay, next slide. And so this final slide here just summarizes some of the density calculations based on the modeling. So you can see in the far left column the different scenarios that we just ran through. And the darker blue column to the right is for 1320 North Courthouse Road. So you can see the GFA or the gross floor area and the FAR floor area ratio for both buildings, 1320 and 1310. And then the height on the far right column. So for existing conditions, that's at 153, and then it varies for the GLUP, and then the CO zoning at 180, and finally the 210. So you can see that for the 1320 block, it could potentially be roughly 10.0 FAR for 1320 based on the modeling that we've done, and roughly 6.7 for the 1310 block. Next slide. So I think I'm going to turn it back over to Margaret to run through the final portion of the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Brett. So I'm going to go through these slides pretty quickly because I know we want to have time for discussion. So these are some of the criteria that we look at for studies, in terms of determining whether the amendment would be something that we should consider, whether we need to do additional study. So we're looking for support for county goals. Would the amendment possibly advance broader county goals? We're looking at existing planning guidance. Has there been a change in conditions? And so since the sector plan addendum, there has been a change in conditions in terms of office vacancy, and some of the square has started to fade out. Next slide, please. And then we're looking at, are there any relevant ongoing processes? No. The surrounding context, that is very important. That's why we're looking at the entire block, not just this one site. And then is there a phase development site plan? In this case, no. And so next we have a table that analyzes all these different things. And so, just looking at county goals, we went through earlier some of the guidance from the GLUB master plan, the affordable housing master plan. We looked at the existing guidance from the 93 Courthouse Sector Plan. We looked at some guidance from Courthouse Square, of course, realizing again that the site is not actually in that district. The existing zoning of CO allows up to 180 feet. You know, as I mentioned, change in conditions, more office vacancy, no current ongoing processes, applicability of the surrounding area. You know, in the surrounding area, we have some different types of development. We see some medium residential immediately to the south and some high residential to the west. And then, of course, there's no PDSP phase development site plan here. Next slide. And now we're going to conclude with the LRPC discussion. So staff has come up with a few questions to hopefully help frame the discussion. So first of all, if there are any clarifying questions, and then in terms of where we go next, is the applicant's request to amend the courthouse special district boundary in the realm of consideration, or should the applicant pursue redevelopment under the existing high office apartment hotel and the existing zoning of CO, where they can achieve building heights up to 180 feet for residential development? If amending the district boundary is potentially appropriate, is it reasonable to assume that the general recommendations from the courthouse sector plan, Courthouse Square addendum should be applied to this site or not? If the Courthouse Square guidance is applied to this site, could the district's maximum building height of 210, which is previously only reserved for that landmark block, also be appropriate for the 1310 and 1320 and 1310 North Courthouse Road properties? And does the LRPC have sufficient information to provide this feedback? And if not, what additional information would you all be looking for? Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so you know, anybody that's ever been in a meeting with me, we do around the table for efficiency. So let me just start with clarifying questions. Scott, do you have any clarifying questions? Henry. Okay. Stuart?
The only question I would have is the modeling coming from that particular perspective. What I'd be most interested in seeing, I think it was early in your presentation, is modeling from the cabin.
Okay. You want that slide back? Would you like the slide back up?
Yeah, or whatever, just what is the difference between the modeling that you see? I think that's very relevant in terms of its impact, particularly over a Lincoln Memorial, maybe more detail in the modeling based on its impact in those scenarios.
Okay. So Hale, do you have any clarifying questions?
Sorry, no.
Okay, Bob.
No, ma'am.
Jim?
Oh, yeah, great. Yeah, I have a question. And I may have missed this in the presentations, but what would including this in the courthouse special area give this property that it doesn't already have as part of the larger sector plan?
I can answer that.
So if this site is included in the Courthouse Square boundary, they could potentially access the special provisions for Courthouse Square. It's interesting, the special provisions are listed in the zoning ordinance, and it's a little bit different than the regular CO. So they are not able to access 1559, which is bonus height and density. The heights are capped by the heights on the codified map. So because this site was not included in that map, the LRPC would need to, and staff would need to opine on what the appropriate height should be there. And then they also can't access TDR provisions because we were very, very intentional when we were doing the implementation for the Courthouse Square sector plan, that for this particular area, we wanted to really make sure that we're achieving the goals in the sector plan, not just, we have so many goals and so many wonderful things that we want to achieve, but here we really wanted to focus in on those guiding principles and goals for Courthouse Square. So in terms of what that maximum FAR is, that's not something that's discussed in the zoning for this. It's really form-based driven by the height and the setbacks and other parameters that are outlined in the Courthouse Square addendum. So the height really is an important consideration here.
So potentially they could get more height under the addendum than under the current CO zoning, under the sector plan?
So the currently they have 153 feet for their existing building. Under CO, they could go up to 180 for residential development. So that's
Right.
the zoning they have right now. If they want more than that, and that's what they're looking for, is additional height. And we agree that it's appropriate for this block to be incorporated into the special district. Then we would need to have a discussion, well, what heights from the sector plan addendum are appropriate
But
for
that's a
this.
but that's a separate later process then. It would be a tier 2 potentially.
And or could be part of this process, and or could be handled at site plan, but it's really up to you all to define and determine, is this appropriate to be considered within the special district? And then if so, what of the guidance from Courthouse Square should be applied here? And what is that right height?
So Jim, you're moving into process. This was just clarifying.
fine. That's fine. I just wanted to, okay, got it.
Okay,
Move
thanks.
on then.
All right, Jill from housing. No, I'm sorry, Karen from housing.
No questions, thanks.
Thank you. And then I just want to let everybody know, we also have Patty Cullen, 1310 representative is online as well. Did anybody else from PC join, or any commissions that are on the roster? Okay, fantastic. All right, so now we're moving into the real substance of the, oh, Tony, I forgot you guys. That's why I put you next to me.
So I can, yeah.
Yeah.
So with the Lincoln Memorial question, at what height, say this thing were to get built, at what height does it become visible from that viewpoint above the Lincoln? Because I think that is an important consideration.
We
Can we go to the slide? Yeah, there was a slide that showed it.
Yeah. At 210, you start to see it.
You actually see it at 210.
Okay.
So roughly 180 is where it's flush with the top. And of
Okay.
course, that changes whether you're at the Lincoln Memorial or Washington or the Capitol. But the goal was, as the NCPC described it, that escarpment, they wanted really to see a consistent line in sight. Right.
That's 210.
Yeah.
And that's 210 was sort of pushing up above that a little bit, but it was also not on center. So the landmark block is to the right of the Lincoln Memorial, where this is directly.
Exactly. Yeah, I think that makes this a very special kind of circumstance. So 180 is like the sort of maximum starts to poke up.
Well,
behind.
I'd like to just interject because I've looked at the NCPC view shed diagram they use for this. This is the view all the way east from here. When you look at if you can go back to the diagram that shows the view cone, that would be very helpful. If you start where you're standing at the view cone, you can see the entire Arlington skyline from there. The entire thing, from the ground to the top of the buildings, the entire skyline is visible. So as you head west in this, right? As you head west, of course, it starts to come down below the trees. But as you head east in that corridor, everything's visible. The entire Arlington skyline is visible from this view cone, right over the monuments. It is today. I'd like to say something a little bit extra too about the NCPC resolution that the county board passed in 1982. It said, yes, that we would work friendly and be friendly with NCPC over the years. This was in 1982. Of course, heights have changed in Arlington. Many buildings have been built well above the zoning caps that they set in place in 1982. We're way beyond that these days. But that resolution was not, we will never do this. That resolution, when you read it, and I can provide it for you all, and I can actually read it here if you want. That resolution was a very, I wouldn't call it terse, but a very polite way of telling NCPC that we are going to work with you. We understand these are important things, But the Arlington County Board has the authority to decide what's appropriate to be built in Arlington. We are going to look at our own zoning and our own planning, and we're going to work with you where applicable, but the Arlington County skyline is not going to be planned by Washington, D.C. And that's why we have Roslyn the way it is. That's why we have Ballston, the RV corridor the way it is. If we had said no buildings can be seen from the monuments, Arlington would have never been built.
Okay, so we'll get to it in the pod. Let's get to the conversation. And listen, this is your LRPC, so I promise you we will get to your process. Ready? A clarifying question?
Yeah, just following up on what you said. I'm confused because the slide pointed at 210, but it was flat, and then the other slide said 210, and you could actually see it. Which one is really 210?
Both of them are. One is the horizon line of 210. So if any building were to pop up, that's where a 210 would occur. So that's sort of the starting point. But when we start to plug in actual buildings based on their location, you see a much smaller, see, this is sort of the starting point. So anything within the courthouse area is where we started to look. And then as you went to the next slide, we started looking at specific sites within the courthouse area. We were looking at the landmark block, we looked at Sprayer, and we looked at, and now tonight we're looking at 1320. So this is really very site specific.
That looks so much bigger than just the line. So
Can we show you the actual exhibit from
So wait, okay, no,
NCPC?
no, Tad, let's maintain some control over this. All right. If there are questions for the applicant, we will make sure that the rest of this, we're gonna let the discussion be with EC. Let's move on to the process questions, all right? The process question number one, is the applicant's request to amend the courthouse special district boundary in the realm of consideration? Or should the applicant pursue redevelopment under the existing high office apartment hotel GLUP designation and CO zoning designations, which would allow for building height up to 180 feet? Scott, do you have a question on this?
I don't have a question on it.
Okay, Tenley.
So my question is, there seemed to be an implication in the presentations that if we approve this, then that makes the Courthouse Square amendment more realistic. And is that because with the extra density that they would be granted, we would get that much additional community benefits, which would include possibly a park contribution that would allow us to redevelop that spot?
Well, I think that the question is it even in the realm of possibility for you? Is this for us to be able to, so this is a yes or no? If yes, then the next question. And then if yes, then the next question, right? So based on what you've even had a consideration of today between what Tad said and what staff said, is it even in the realm of possibility for us to move the boundary to allow this property site to be included within the courthouse addendum? Courthouse Square addendum.
Okay.
Yeah, I think.
What the benefits are?
I can answer that.
Well, can we just? Yeah, is it within the realm of possibility? Like, if you have a question related to that, your question is related to number 2.
Okay, so I'll say.
Do you have a question in regard to what will be the impacts of not doing it or doing it? Is that where your question is going?
I think it's within the realm of possibility.
You believe it's in the realm of possibility?
Yeah.
Scott, do you believe it's in the realm of possibility?
Yes.
Okay. So Harry, you believe it's in the realm of possibility? Okay.
And
I'm sorry, Stuart, I missed you. I'm just gonna.
Okay. yeah, well, it's no problem. I would say it's only in the realm of possibility if it's specified, not for some future time to decide. It should be decided in the same way that the Courthouse Square plan was conceived in a form-based code way with real specifics. It's not to find out or to adjust according to FAR and achieving some. It's a matter, I think, of if it is form-based code, if it fits in the same way, then it is within the realm of possibility, but there would have to be real specifics, including commitments to incorporate it into that plan, which means the corridor, the promenade, or something along those lines. But I think it should not be in the realm of possibility just to throw it in there. because it's a very specific plan.
So if it enhances the addendum.
If it enhances or if there is a commitment, if it has to be, I think, to get beyond LRPC, I think into the realm of possibility of that, it's not just approving a vague notion. It's a very specific, not down to, illustrations and things, but very specific form-based code idea. And decisions have to be made prior to it being reasonable to do. It's not appropriate to just throw in my mind at least, another square there, the south section,
Okay,
and see how it turns out in the future.
so not two distinct things. You wanted cohesion, is what you're saying. It's in the realm of possibility. for
Yeah,
cohesion.
it's not just putting it in there for future decision. Part of the decision, if it is possible to do, would have to do with the types of decisions that were decided when the original square was done.
Are you saying that it's within, I'm sorry, I'm not.
It could be within, I'm sorry, it could be within if it is a very specific
So do you-
proposal.
Does this mean that it would require a tier 2 for you? It could be in the realm of possibility if you had like a tier 2 study analysis.
If I had, I guess we would certainly have to have a tier 2, but it would also have to do with approving an amended square plan that is appropriate, including the height, including the form, including the promenade.
I got you.
Can I ask you one question from before I forgot to ask?
Yeah, yeah.
Just a simple one. How long is the lease on this building that was approved, Chris?
It was, I'm not sure of the exact date, but the last time they have automatic 5-year renewals. So when we were looking at it, it was through 2032. So I don't know what the terms of the lease are now, but I do know that they were 5-year automatic renewals.
Oh, but so you don't know what the commitment is to this building?
And then this building actually, interesting bit of knowledge, is in 2060, the building actually becomes part of the county. The original land lease. It's in there's a little plaque in the corner in the front lobby. It becomes ours in 2060, regardless of this building.
Okay, all right. So hell, you're up. And within the, no, that's okay. I was just trying to do the math on one minute. Realm of possibility for you. Yes, realm of possibility for you. You said yes. Did you want to add anything?
I'm so sorry.
No, please. Yes, okay, go ahead.
I didn't have it in the head.
No, that's okay.
On slide 30, there's a chart on the bottom. It has the sidewalk length, the description of the streetscapes for Courthouse, 14 Wedge Beach. Never know how to pronounce that. It says that for 13th and Beach on the Courthouse site plan, it says not included. I was wondering what that means.
Slide 31.
Yes, ma'am.
Those basically that's referencing the original courthouse sector plan, which was adopted in 1993. And in that sector plan, they did not opine on those particular streets.
Oh, great, thank you.
Yeah, it's in the realm of possibility.
Realm of possibility. Realm of possibility?
I agree with the gentleman at the
Stewart?
end that, yeah, I don't feel comfortable. I think it's a bit vague at this stage. And if we had a lot more detail in terms of what the density is going to be, what the commitments are, then I would feel more comfortable.
Yes, sir. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, yes, with the same kind of conditions.
Okay.
Stuart was stipulating. We're on the same page tonight, I think.
Okay. Stewart. And Jim? So realm of possibilities, what's on the table?
Yes, I think it is, if only because, if I heard correctly in the presentations, it was originally considered to be within the addendum study area, and the only reason it wasn't is the property owners at that point had no interest in being included. So we originally did think it was supposed to be part of the larger addendum area. So clearly it is within the realm of possibility.
I think there might be some conversation about clarifying what your assumption is right now.
Yeah, we would need to look at the charge, Jim, from the county board at the time to see, and it may have been, I think it was very constrained because we didn't want to open up the entire sector plan. So it was really, the focus was on the county properties and the adjacency to the square. So we could look at the chart.
Yeah, because this would have been adjacent to the property, because this is adjacent to the parking lot.
Yeah, my recollection is that that is not the only reason why it wasn't included, but we can go back and look at that.
Okay, but anyway, I think it is within the realm of possibility, at least for tier 1 purposes.
Thank you. And then Karen.
Yes, I do agree as well. Yes, that it is in the realm of possibilities. Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, we're now moving on to question number 2, friends. If amending the district boundary is potentially appropriate, if it's within the realm of possibilities, is it reasonable to assume that the general recommendations of the Courthouse Square addendum should be applied to this site for consistency? Right, so this is now going to what's codified, an increase from 153 to 180. And, right?
Yeah.
I know.
Well,
180, and then to 10, right? So 57 feet is what Chris, so I don't do math, but that's what his paper says. All right, Scott, if amending the district boundary is potentially appropriate, is it reasonable to assume that the general recommendations of the Courthouse Square addendum should be applied to 1310 and 1320 for consistency?
When we discussed it as a civic association, our main goal was achievement of the Courthouse Square project. So I guess what we would want to know is what's the maximum extent of public benefits we could get from the project.
Okay.
I don't know how that works with all the other restrictions that the staff had mentioned.
Okay. So what are the maximum community benefits that come out of what they are trying to achieve here? Okay.
Do you want us to answer that, or that's just a question for that?
What is there?
I just like.
I didn't think there was one right now.
I think we want to make sure there's an understanding of what that means.
I just, if we go back to maybe slide 16, just to kind of reiterate some important points. The Courthouse Square, the potential community benefits for the future site plan. So prospective development could achieve density that could help achieve a Courthouse Square without being in the special district right now. And also its inclusion in the special district does not guarantee that a future site plan would enable the creation of the square. So there are a lot of different factors. And then, I don't know, Matt, if you want to share anything about the CIP right now.
But that's what I was going to say. Can you clarify to everybody, that doesn't mean that you would online a square, right?
I think I should.
You have to go through the CIP.
I think I should clarify that. There is not enough value created if we go from 153 feet to 180 feet to contribute anything. That would be under our base contribution system, in a standard site plan process under existing zoning, which would, just yield base contributions. It would be nowhere in the realm of anything that would support a project of the immense size we're talking about. We're talking about a major capital project that's going to cost millions and millions and millions of dollars to produce. So the very practical answer to that question is, if you all want Courthouse Square to happen sometime in your lifetime, this is where you can create the value. That value happens when this building gets put into the courthouse special district. That allows us to increase the height, increase the density, and share those gains with the community.
And just for clarification, because I can feel all the feelings in here. Courthouse Square requires a separate process because Courthouse Square brings a lot of other stakeholders. So what Tad is saying is their contribution increases with the increased potential increased density that they may be seeking. So their investment would likely increase to provide or bring to the table during a different process.
It's directly proportionally comparable. So it's the way the contributions are contributed are based on increased density, contribute as we go at a consistent, essentially, rate. So the more value that's created here, the more that goes into the community benefits. And then that's the point of this block. This block stands to create quite a lot if it's planned correctly. And this is the last proximate block that we'll develop that can provide these benefits. So it's parking lot or civic green. That's really, and again, to get back to our questions so that we all understand, if we can move the boundary line That allows the equity in this project to go ahead and disperse the funds to begin studying all this. Then we can go through a multi-year process with this body, take as long as it needs to kind of develop these ideas. But this is, again, a turnkey moment. This is, please open the door so that we can move these funds from a recap and hold to something that's a once in a generational opportunity.
If I can just take that working backwards. Yeah. I think everybody here, certainly staff, definitely wants to have a less riskier investment on your part, and whoever else is involved. And I like how you framed that those funds would allow this body to continue to study this further. Right. The LRPC body.
That's correct. That's right.
So what that usually means is having additional guidance to your point was not just bending the boundary, but making sure that rules that apply within that boundary apply here. And that does mean something, which I think the third question gets at. But the other one is really understanding what is the area gaining by incorporating additional sites. And that brings up a much bigger question of, had you guys been included in the study area almost a decade ago, what would that plan yield or identify as goals, this block, especially like physical, tangible goals? And I think we need to know that before we, I think, signal an appropriate height, perhaps. And the reason I say that is because I think when you were mentioning this site has the potential, right? And this is what the shining object everybody keeps looking at, right? I'm here to support because it's going to get us faster to realizing the civic square, which is everybody's goal. When we say this site has the potential to earn 3 to 4 more times, that's the landmark.
It does.
If it gets what height?
If it gets 10 FAR. And we modeled that. The model we showed you was at 210 feet. We can responsibly, we showed you that was a scale concept we showed you. We've studied that. You've seen other models we've done. There's lots of ways to get to 10 FAR. We feel like there's more creative ways than a simple, I don't want to call it arbitrary, but just a 210 height cap, because I know it's in reference to the previous plan. And I think the concepts on that might evolve when people start to evaluate the trade-offs. But in order for us to get to the point where we can cut loose the funding to actually start this process, because this study, when we look at the community facilities we're going to be talking about creating, the shared streets, undergrounding the surface lot, incorporating this giant block on the south side, that is going to take millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars in design costs and years of time. And the equity in this endeavor can't just simply go into that without having some larger understanding of what the parameters actually are. Right now we're at a 3.8. I can't get an investment committee in New York to cut loose, several tens of millions of dollars to go through a 4-year process on something that says 3.8 on paper with a sort of a social handshake on, hey, this could potentially be 10, because that's just gambling. And what they need is a commitment from this community to say, hey, we want you to come in and prove this out. We want you to make this investment in Arlington. This is $1 billion investment. We want you to invest your money in Arlington and come and work with us. And, we want that public assurance that, something along the lines of what was approved at the landmark block in density and height is within the realm of possibility before we start burning through millions of dollars. And that's solely what our request was to move the boundary line. And that gives us the clarity on that point publicly. And then we're all committed together to proceed through a process in the future where we study exactly what that's going to be.
Just for clarification, I think when you say your request, I'm only framing it because it does keep coming up.
Yeah.
Clarification. It never really is 210 feet. So I do want to kind of just clarify that for everybody in the audience.
Yes.
The same presentation you continue to highlight, you're not allowed to share.
Right.
Depicted heights of 260, 300 feet.
Right.
And I suspect, and what my fear is that this 3 to 4 times community benefit when compared to the landmark block.
Right.
That's the height that is built upon.
Right.
Particularly where landmark block was and the bonus density it had to yield.
Right.
Or earn compared to what's happening here when we're dealing with an existing 153-story building.
153-foot building. Yeah.
Right. So that's really, I think, where additional analysis and modeling is critical. If we bring this into the boundary,
right?
What are we setting up as an expectation? Because to your point, SPRC is going to need to know, how do we evaluate if this is appropriate? And it can't be a blank check beyond just whatever the sector plan allocated for every site within its boundary.
And I want to just stop because also LRPC can't do that.
Yeah.
So we need to continue with these process questions because this isn't about a proposed project right now. This is
No,
about
it's
that site. And so I'm going to move on to Tenley. Tenley, if amending this boundary, if this district boundary is appropriate, is it reasonable to assume that the recommendations of the addendum should be applied to this particular site for consistency?
Yes, though I do have a question that was brought up kind of in the presentation. So the max height for the building on the north side of the square, it's on like a flat surface. So 210 is 210, whereas this project is on a sloping hill. And as we've talked about in like Crystal City, it's the average height. So it could be higher in some places like Matt's saying and lower in the other. So we're going to be talking about the average height when we're talking about like the recommendations for the Courthouse Square addendum. It's the average height. So it could be taller in some places, lower in others. And so then that view from the Lincoln Memorial is not going to be flat. It's going to be like this.
The big distinction being absolute heights, which is what the sector plan is based upon, as opposed to what the site currently requests. A county board, if this project is right, can you consider any kind of height? And I think that very wide open door is where I think the question number 3 gets us to.
But this special area has a max height, right? That's of
Sector
210.
plan area, then that's
Okay, and it's 210, but that's not the max of anywhere on the property. That's the average height.
it could mean something else for different sites because of their elevation.
Right, and that 210 was only for the landmark block. So we were very intentional when we were in the process about, this is going to be the landmark block. That's going to get the highest height. So all the other heights are less. So 190, 100, 180, 50, 120 are the other heights. And to that point, I'd also just like to say, Tad had said that this is the only site left to redevelop. There are actually other sites like the Strayer Block, et cetera, that have the potential, the AMC site, to redevelop on this square.
Anything else? Okay, Stuart, do you want me to read the question?
I think I got it.
Okay.
And so it goes back to what I said, which is, I don't think that, yes, the overall limits or the overall idea of this sector of the square, Courthouse Square, yes, but not without the form-based code, because the form-based code is what makes it, and the elevation. I'm so happy Tenley brought that up, because the elevation is part of the consideration as to set those maximum heights on each individual site, if I understand. And so the same considerations I talked about, and I don't think that, I think that's probably one of the most important restrictions of the plan. And thereby, I think that form-based code nature has to be the form-based code before any commitments to anything. You have to know what's going to go, what you're committing to.
This question also asked about whether to carry forward the urban design guidance, right, and the other elements of the sector plan. So, in all disclosure, if not, then are we reopening the sector? Which is something that I think is beyond the scope of this conversation. But so just to be clear, the question is, do we extend sort of the character, the goals, to where community benefits are very clearly just directed towards specific goals, affordable housing, open space, the various needs that were identified. And so is it it's an extension of all of those elements, not just the height?
And I agree, and thank you, Chris, because I think that that's very important, as I had mentioned before, in regards to what will we be getting? Will we be extending the promenade? Will we be extending the nature of the facades and the setbacks and everything else? And so.
Thank you. Okay, so Hill.
Yeah.
You want me to read the question?
Yes.
Okay, got it. If amending the district boundary is potentially appropriate, is it reasonable to assume that the general recommendations in the Courthouse Square addendum should be applied to this site for consistency?
Okay. Yes, I think something that I imagine is being obviously considered is when we think about extending that boundary, that all of the work and planning that goes on the streets that surround it are consistent with what, you know, the Courthouse Square plan is talking about. So that's an emphasis on, you know, pedestrian access, bike access, transit access. I think that as, you know, we go forward and start thinking about the actual kind of project that's going to happen on this space, that when we consider that project, that, you know, on like slide 31, for example, it says that 14th Street would be recommended to be converted to a shared street. I think that's great. I would almost argue it's good enough for us to extend that and say maybe 13th or Reach should also be considered as shared streets. And so, yeah, so just keeping in mind that these elements of pedestrian friendly transit access, bike access, those are kind of top of mind. This is a pretty heavily trafficked area. And so, you know, and a lot of these roads are major roads, and it's kind of, what kind of concerns me in some ways is the language on slide 31 where it says per the MTP. And of course, that was a conversation for the MTP, so it's not really exactly here, but the idea that a shared street is a local street where the needs of motor vehicles are generally secondary to the needs of pedestrians, etc. That's great, but the fact that the needs of the motor vehicles are generally secondary, there is room in that sentence for it to not be the case that motor vehicles are secondary to the needs of pedestrians and bicyclists. I think when we start to consider what can happen in this space, that we are very careful to ensure that when we talk about a shared street, that the pedestrians and the bicyclists, that those needs are actually top of mind, rather than kind of just saying, okay, we'll do that, but, you know, we're not going to really change, you know, let's say parking or how the actual road is designed to discourage fast driving. So that, yes, the answer is of course yes, but, you know, considering that we need to be very careful about how we address some of the transportation elements. And this goes for any kind of project that we consider here in Arlington. But yeah, in this area specifically. Then the last thing I'll say is, this is an opportunity, I think, for a lot of transportation benefit. And I say that because South Courthouse seems to be kind of I guess, a transit desert. Like, there's not that many bus lines, if you look at the map, that serve the South Courthouse area. Like where like the bus station is here, it serves several bus lines, which is fantastic because it sits on the RV corridor. But like immediately south of that, there's like a space where there's no bus routes. And I would almost consider, if we're going to start developing here, maybe it's an opportunity for us to be like, okay, if we're going to add developments here, are there opportunities for the county to actually extend bus routes into these neighborhoods? Because I think that, you know, this is kind of me on my soapbox, but Arlington is considered a great place for transit, but we are very much transit concentrated along the RV corridor and the Richmond Highway corridor. There are parts of Arlington that do not have good access to transit. This is one of them. And so when we think about the developments here, making sure that the future of our transportation is considered. So is there an opportunity for increased bus routes frequency? And then at the same time, ensuring that the streets that surround these developments are very much shared streets, prioritizing the needs of pedestrians and bicyclists.
Thank you.
Yes, I agree that the characteristics should be extended.
Okay, thank you. Joe.
I agree
With Stuart.
Yeah.
Stuart, you got a +1. +2.
Plus
3. Okay. Jim?
Yeah, if we're going to be putting it in the addendum, then the addendum applies.
Thank you. Also, Karen?
Yes, and hopefully some of the community benefits will include some affordable housing, but that's, you know, way down the road.
Okay. All right. This is our last question. If the courthouse square guidance is applied, so now listen, the majority of people in this room have said yes with some qualifications. If the courthouse square guidance is applied to this site, could the district's maximum building height of 210, previously only reserved for the landmark block, also be appropriate for the 1320 and 1310 North Courthouse Road properties? Does the LRPC have sufficient information to provide this feedback? And if not, what additional information will be needed? So if the guidance of the addendum is applied to the site, could the maximum building height of 210 also be appropriate for this site? Do you have enough information to provide feedback? And if not, what information do you need to provide feedback?
So this conversation was really helpful for helping me answer this. Our civic association's main priorities are, which is through a survey that we've conducted, a little bit more recent than the data staff presented, connecting with neighbors, multimodal transportation, and environment, which includes like greening and tree canopy. The Courthouse Square would help with all of those dramatically in the neighborhood. So that was the basis of what I said. Like, we want to do whatever maximizes contributions to the Courthouse Square. So I guess my answer is no. I wouldn't apply a height limit if that would limit the public benefits that we would get from the project.
Okay, thank you. Tenley?
So I think it is likely that the maximum building height of 210, which was reserved for landmark building, would be appropriate. They do want to have a little bit more information primarily about this regional agreement that we have to protect the views. I think it's important that we have a really good understanding of what a proposed project could look like if there are different heights, how that's going to impact, and just make sure that we are reaching out to the acronym that you kept saying. Yeah, and make sure that this will be a neighborly thing to do while we're also striving to achieve the sustainability goals and the providing the park and whatnot, and affordable housing, more housing in general.
Okay, thank you. Stuart?
Yeah, I would say many of us in my community feel a real responsibility as sort of the backdrop to the nation's capital and everybody in the country that comes to visit there. And we don't do that because NCPC tells us that, in spite of whoever ends up on NCPC or whoever ends up at, at the Department of Interior. We still have these concerns as citizens, and I think we've had that for many, many years and many situations, and said basically the same thing. So I would say one last thing is, you could probably ask Nancy Acabee, because a group of us dealing with Roslyn, they said, oh, we went to the Senate, and from the head of the Senate's office, you could basically see the reverse of Roslyn. As people were saying, oh, well, yes, not that much. There was huge impacts of some of those buildings, and they were not necessarily positive. And it's not because anyone's telling us that. I just looked at it and I said to her, well, do you see what I see? Is this something, well, so it's something to consider in terms of visual presentation. That was a field trip that was great, but the real thing is you can see with pictures as far as the elevation and from the Capitol, which encompasses the entire mall. And there's definitely an impact. I mean, I could see this skyline, much more I could see, but also the code is very different here than it is in Roslyn. Not that we were so thrilled with that, but so you're right. In the middle of the code, this is the backdrop. It doesn't mean that there shouldn't be anything there, but it's got to be very carefully considered. And so it would take some real convincing as far as this being appropriate. But I wouldn't think that you just want a big. Anyway, I just don't think that as a backdrop to the square, that you would just want a big massive building.
So you just would want more specific.
It would take a lot of convincing, and we have to see. I think you need to see visuals.
Okay.
convincing to do what?
Convincing to say that it was this, that 210 was appropriate here as much as it was in the legend, especially 210. You shouldn't be talking about a different effective elevation of a final building. So I think that has to be considered because, again, before you could even consider that, maybe some of the square has to be reopened. I don't know, but I think it takes some convincing and some visual aids.
Okay, thank you. So no.
Yes, I think, yeah, yes, it would be appropriate. The height limit would be, the height of 210 would be appropriate. I think, I don't know if I would require, I don't know if I need information now. I think a lot of the information that I guess, as someone from the Transportation Commission is concerned, I would, a lot of that information is like traffic flows, what kind of impact is, a building of that height is going to have a lot of people. So what is how many pedestrians are we going to see more? What is the impact on like are we going to see a lot more traffic in that area? And those are all questions that would be answered once the project up, which is not where we are. So I think, I think this is an important, so yes, sorry, I'm rambling, but yes. And all the information I think I would probably want to know about is stuff that would happen later on in the process. But that being said, as you begin this process, that you do consider and make sure that when you come back and present the information that you are clear about, okay, what kind of traffic impact are we going to have? What kind of transportation impact are we going to have? Because the questions that I would have afterwards is this pedestrian friendly? Is this bike friendly? Where are the bike stations? What are the considerations for bus routes? All of that will come up, right? Parking will come up, right? So all of those questions will come up later, but having those in the back of our heads now, I think is really critical. Specifically parking ratios. We've always had conversations as projects come up about what the right parking ratio is. Again, information and questions that happen at a later date, but keeping that in the back of our heads, that this is an area where a lot of people are walking. So the need for, larger parking ratios might not be that relevant here, right? Might not need a 0.6 parking ratio. Maybe you could consider a lower one. But again, that's all happening.
So just to clarify then, are you suggesting that the tier 2 is or is not needed? Or can this, do you have enough information?
That's question 4.
Question 4.
That's question 4.
Just trying to clarify where you are because you're sort of moving further along. Maybe with
Well, the question being, are we ready to go to RTA or we need to?
I do not believe it's appropriate to set maximum building height because we don't have sufficient information. My opinion is that information will be based on community benefits.
Okay. I have a similar concern about setting a maximum height without knowing, what the benefits are going to be. What is the green coverage on the site itself? What are the, Park and Rec, we want to know, like, what are the facilities for exercising and what is there going to be green rooms? All these things. And I'm actually a little concerned now about they're asking, would we be authorizing them to even maybe think of going higher? Because of the increased community benefit that we can get. And I'd like to, this is definitely a heat island area. We definitely need more trees here. There's no question about that. But when we talk about more density, we talk about more people using the green areas and the parks that we have.
So I'm confused a little bit. I'm confused about, I think you can, okay. So, because first you said it's not appropriate to set a maximum building height, but then you were worried about them going over
I'm
210.
worried about them going over.
So you actually believe 210 would be a maximum height, or you want something that potentially is lower?
I don't know. I'm asking a question, I suppose. Is there a chance that they would, if we do let them go forward, that they would negotiate a higher building?
But I think that's why, you know, the courthouse square for all these other sites very clearly establish that maximum height, and under no circumstances is the board able to change that. So I think if they wanted to be a part of this district, one of the questions would be, would we want to apply the same type of guidance where we know for certain what that maximum height is? And, you know, particularly with regards to the view shed.
But who and when sets that height?
That's
what I'm not.
and I guess that's sort of up to, you know, we want to hear from you, and is there a need for more discussion?
Like, do you need more information to be able to contribute your analysis or lens to this conversation? Like, there's like, hey, I really feel X, Y, and Z, but I need this piece of information about it.
Well, yeah, we need to know what the community benefits are.
Well, and I'll say that was.
So I'd like to actually just say something. I totally agree with you, right? So we're trying to figure that out too, because, you know, we want to make a substantial investment in Arlington. And, you know, this public benefit is going to benefit the community. It's also going to benefit this asset. You know, people aren't looking at investing in Courthouse. When I said this is going to be an economic driver for South Courthouse, that's because we're going to create that space, right? And so at this stage of analysis, we don't know what the county is going to be comfortable with as far as height, or the community is going to be, when I say county, I mean the community is going to be comfortable with as far as height. They need to look at the trade-offs, right? And so setting an absolute height we sort of have a problem with, which is, look, you guys, if we add 10 feet to this, we could add, you know, X amount million more dollars. We could do this extra thing. And if you come in 10 feet or 20 feet below that, we might not have a project, right? So or we may not be able to proceed. So the idea is that our idea was, you know, we would love to reference the plan, the goals, the plan, the vision of the plan, but nailing down sort of I don't mean to call it arbitrary in a negative way, but we feel like it's arbitrary in the context of this conversation because, you know, we want to figure out the best way to craft that density so that it fits in. You know, the renderings we saw of the buildings, those are just, if you max out the site and you go up with this giant block of a building. We're not going to build a giant block of a building. I was looking at those floor plates. There's no way we're building a building like that. That's not even a residential building. That's a massive, gigantic office building they showed. That's the last thing in the world we're going to be building behind the monuments. So, you know, I totally understand not being able to pinpoint a maximum height. I would love it if we could, you know, say 210 feet, achieving all the goals of the plan, you know, and then leave it open like any other site plan for the county board to make the ultimate decision on what ultimate height is, because they're going to get all the information from the community. We're going to go through a multi-year process.
But that's not what this plan is. This plan is maximum height for
Yeah,
built. So
right.
if you get into this plan, that's what.
And it really
that's where
gets,
it confusing.
right.
It gets to your earlier,
To be asking for, and yet that seems to be not what you're asking for.
I think your earlier question nailed it, because I think you framed it as, when do we decide? And I think if you listen to the open-ended recommendation, right, we'll let you know what the height is, right? Once you see how much money we can generate from this, means that we're in some ways we are deciding tonight. In this meeting with whoever's here, that is the study. We are deciding that any height might do, as long as we like the number we see associated with it. And I think the challenge is, we're hearing it's 3 to 4 times as much as landmark. So my math, that's $40 million. And you're saying that you can do that by just adding 50 feet to the existing building.
No, we're not talking about.
You said you could do that within 210 feet height.
We can do that with a 10 FAR. That's right, which we've been
I heard-
modeled. Which
you
we've
said-
modeled.
hold on, you said
Hold on, which
210.
we've modeled at 210 feet. Do I think that the best modeling occurs at 210 feet? Absolutely not. You could do much better architecture with varying heights and being able to open up the space of buildings, create more elegant buildings, when we looked at increasing the height by just 40 feet, we saw an increase in open space of 4x based on those street layouts and the additional open space. So just on that south block, we can open up and add an additional 4 times the amount of open space that would be available at a 210 foot height. And so we can model.
I think the plan, the recommendation.
We can model it.
10 feet seems to work for you.
We can do 210 feet. We absolutely can. Yes, we can.
So I think there are a number of things to unpack here, but I think one thing that's really important is that, as Matt was saying, if we're saying that there should be no height limit, that would be really atypical from our processes. We don't have areas with no height applications. So that would be really setting a new precedent, which I think has ramifications. I think we need to keep in mind that you said, and I think your question was a good question about, what I'm not sure what I'm getting. And so I think that is one reason why when we were developing the plan initially, we wanted to provide that certainty as to what you are getting. And then I'd just like to say that, I think the applicant is insinuating that they might be able to deliver the square, the park. Well, there's a lot of steps that would need to happen before that, and that park, unfortunately, is going to be very, very expensive. It's going to require underground parking. We need a parking study. There's a lot of work to do. For instance, that surface parking lot is now used by jurors. It's used by the courts. It's used by Tenley. It's used by a lot of us. It's used by police. That some of them want to keep vehicles running because they have canines and things. We have tradespeople that come with trucks with ladders on top. So how do they park underground? There's a lot to kind of think through. And so from a CIP perspective and just from a parks perspective, it's not even in the CIP actually that we're doing the park at this juncture. There are a lot of really expensive studies that need to be done. So I just wanted to provide that context that the park, maybe some portion of it, but the park isn't necessarily going to be delivered with this or without this. And it could be achieved, even under CO, some portion.
And I just do want to add that during the deliberations for the sector plan, community benefits was not a topic that came up because it was more about the recognition that there was not enough development within this district to completely realize the square, that the county was going to have to contribute a significant amount. But we were also very concerned about the form. So there was a sort of comfort level where we can get as much as we can out of the height and density, but we also recognize that no one project is going to deliver. And so just the garage alone at that time was $60-70 million. So no one project, despite what you're hearing, is going to deliver the square. It's going to have to take a contribution from many sources. And so we don't want to suggest that a certain height is going to achieve a certain result in terms of delivering the square. There's too many other complicating factors that will come into play. It certainly can contribute. It can contribute today. So it doesn't have to be part of the square to be part of the realization of the square. That's something that the county board could decide. So we just don't want this to solely be focused on creating the cash because it's not enough.
Okay, I'm going to move on to you. Do you want the question again?
No. I think I'm merging what Scott and Tim said. I think that my answer could be yes, the maximum building height of 210 would be appropriate. Can't imagine anything over that being appropriate. And like them, concerned about potential community benefits. And I think we have to work really closely with the NCPC to, I'm concerned about the issue.
Okay.
Well, if I had to answer based on what information we have right now, no. I don't think that we're ready to decide tonight, like you were saying, like, oh, we're ready to just go. Because no one really knows how tall this thing's actually going to be. No one knows exactly what kind of benefits we're getting, how much money we'd be getting for the garage. I don't think we're ready. I think to be appropriate. So is every aspect of the question?
I think so.
Okay.
Glenn, tell me.
Yeah, given the information I have now, provisionally, yeah, 210 seems appropriate, or seems doable. Seems like it would work, especially given that the site is sort of down in a hole, that it would probably be up to 30 feet closer to sea level than the 210 on the landmark block anyway. So 210 there is not the same as 210 at the landmark block. So I'm willing to go along with the extra height here. I think that could work, but I'm saying all this provisionally because I would like to, I'm assuming that this will be something that will be looked at even more closely at the tier 2 and certainly at any SBRC as to what the appropriate height would be for this particular site. given the sensitivity to the National Mall, given that this building would be right behind the Lincoln Memorial, unlike the Landmark Block, which is a bit off to the right of it, and not quite as visually in the line there. So, there's will be additional information I think that we'll all be considering as to what the appropriate height is. But right now, yeah, 210 looks like it is okay.
Okay,
Thanks.
thank you. Karen?
I would agree, yes. 210's okay.
210's okay. Okay, thank you. And listen, this is a lightning round because it's 8:55 and we have a public speaker. Okay, so the question, as Tad teed it up, can this go from today's tier 1 review to an RTA? Yes or no? Scott?
An RTA again?
A request to advertise.
Okay. I mean, if I interpret that right, I would say yes. I feel like we need more specifics about the building that's being proposed to really answer some of these questions.
Okay,
So I think it should move forward in the process.
move forward to a more specific process, or, so I think you might be
An
asking for.
RTA for a tier 2.
No, because we wouldn't need an RTA for a tier 2. We would move on to the next LRPC meeting for a tier 2.
Could be explaining what a tier two RTA is.
Yes.
Yes, go
So
ahead.
just briefly, the tier 2 would be a full review and we'd look more in depth at the site and we'd look at, we could do shadow studies and more modeling and that sort of thing and do a more in-depth analysis. And then, so that would be one option to go to tier 2. The other option would be to say, we think we have enough right now to advance directly to site plan review. And then the applicant would submit a building application.
Okay, I'm saying the latter.
Okay.
Does that study, the tier 2 study, involve county modeling or the client
There'd be
modeling?
county modeling.
All right, so if they have their own modeling, do they contribute that also?
So yeah, we could. So what we typically have is we have one model that's very similar to the applicant's model. And then we have other models that we look at and, we'd be doing, I think people have requested more info on the NCPC type view shed, et cetera. So it could be a combo.
Okay.
And then they would also, again, have the opportunity to present and they could present in more detail at that time.
Okay.
Do y'all have a recommendation if this should go to right to SPRC or if there should be a tier 2?
No, we wanted this opportunity to really hear from the LRPC, the community, and other stakeholders.
This is your LRPC, I said it.
I'm just, what is the precedent would be usually to go to tier 2, right? Yeah, so I don't feel like this.
Correct.
Is,
However,
is exceptional enough that, oh, this is so obvious, we should move forward. So I would
so
tier 2.
one example where we went from a tier 1 straight to the RTA and then, the applicant could submit was 2500 Wilson. So that site is, where the Whole Foods is in Clarendon. And then staff had done the Courthouse Square special club study for the site right adjacent to that. 2500 Wilson is one site over from that. And when we did the Courthouse West special club study, there was actually a little bit of information in that study document that referred to the adjacent site, the 2500 Wilson site. And there are a lot of contextual similarities between the two blocks. And so because of that, there was a little bit of guidance, very similar context, and that had Courthouse West process had been, very detailed. When an special subsidy application was submitted for that 2500 Wilson site, the LRPC said, well, we think that we have enough guidance from what you had just studied next door, and there's even specific specific language in there to apply that same guidance to this site. And so that one is an example where, and the only one at this juncture, where we went straight from tier 1 to moving on to SPRC. But there was some guidance for that site already in a study document. And then Tad actually has another project, the 6045.
Margaret, I'm cutting you off. It's 8:59.
Sorry.
We need to get the answer to this question. So you're at tier 2 now, right?
Can I do one clarifying thing real quick?
No, because meeting ends at 9 o'clock and we have public comments still.
Okay.
So we are not going to be able to get to public.
We're not going to be here for tier 2. I just want to make that clear.
That's
right?
fine.
This a tier 2 is about.
Okay, that is not what is on the table. The question is not whether the applicant wants it. The question is whether LRPC.
I don't have a strong opinion right now.
Okay, Stuart.
Tier two is, I would say tier two because we have to set form-based code. If it should be part of this, if it should, so you can't make a decision without what you're doing.
Okay,
Going straight to site plan, those things don't get solved.
okay. You want tier two or are you ready to go?
Yeah, I think I'm ready to go. Can I just ask one quick thing?
Can you not? I'm sorry. We are at 9 o'clock and if you have any questions, you can submit a written question to staff. I'm so sorry about that, okay?
Yeah, sure.
Site plan.
You want to say plan, okay. Tier two. Tier two.
Tier two.
Tier two. Jim, tier two or no?
I don't have a strong feeling. I'm tending on that.
Okay. And Karen?
Just a site plan review.
Okay, thank you. We have what public comment? I don't know who it is. I thought you said you was one person.
Jim's the only one with his hand up.
Jim, put your hand down.
Maybe able to
Okay,
do it.
it's 9 o'clock. If you did not, it's 9:01. If you, I do not end meetings late. If you did not get your answer to your question, or you need more information, or you believe that there's more information that needs to come to the LRPC, please send the information to these three people right here, not to me. These three people right here, right next to me, and they will make sure that we all get it, okay? Thank you for your time and attention. You did not need to be here tonight, but you chose to be here anyway, so thank you for that. I appreciate it. Have a great night. Happy holidays to you all.